Hi, I'm James Surowiecki, the financial columnist for The New Yorker, and we're here today with Dan Vasella, the chairman and CEO of Novartis, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and a company that has been in the news of late because it's one of the companies that is making a vaccine for the H1N1 virus. I thought I'd start actually with a big picture question, which is the conventional take on the pharmaceutical industry is that big pharma in particular is in a kind of tough state, because pipelines are, if not empty, they're not as full as they should be. The traditional research model isn't working that well. What's your take on the state of the pharmaceutical industry today?
What is true is, of course, one never has enough new projects and products. You always wish more. If you look, however, at the productivity, not from a point of view of dollars spent per compound, which has clearly, there the productivity has declined. So it has become ever more expensive to produce one compound. But from a point of view of the sheer number of compounds, the pipelines are fuller today than 5 years ago. So we have more in general in the industry in the pipelines. I believe it has to do that biologicals have taken off, and that we have a number of new technologies which are coming on stream really and start to bring results. However, the industry is in a tough spot because we have escalating costs and we have a lot of cost pressures from a point of view of pricing. With very few exceptions, generally governments set the price in this industry. And here in the US we have free pricing, but we have to give a lot of discounts in order to get the business. And so that has had as a consequence that industry has consolidated.
Are there any costs to getting too big? I mean, one of the arguments that people have made is that one of the reasons why those people who think that innovation has actually, sort of slowed would argue that there's a kind of diseconomy of scale, that when a company gets too big, it's hard for it to kind of retain an innovative spirit.
It's true. Now, of course, as soon as you have a certain size, you have a certain bureaucracy, you have, the inertia of decision-making, complications. And you need to acknowledge that and see it more as a normality, which you need to fight.
Pharmaceutical companies are generally seen as, well, to use the phrase, price gougers, basically. How do you view the debate about drug pricing sort of more generally?
I think there are various aspects to it. One is a question of access. So where I have a real concern is when I hear that people cannot afford their medication anymore, that they cut it into, that the compliance is poor, that between two in a couple, in an old couple, they decide who will take the medicine. That's just not the right way. The reason for it is partially drug prices, but equally as important is coverage. What kind of coverage do we give to people? What access do they have to have coverage? And so it's a much more complex issue. One has also to keep in mind that drugs and drug costs in the overall scheme of things in the US are only 12%. So
12% of the total healthcare budget.
So you can fix the 12%, but that won't fix the issue.
Right.
So healthcare and sustainability, financial sustainability, is a much larger issue in this country. Secondly, you have to ask the fundamental question: are we working on quality of the healthcare services and products, or just trying to cut costs? If you just try to cut costs, you will have no change in the curve. You need to work on quality. In order to work on quality, we need much more transparency. What needs to be changed in the standard of practice, and how do you standardize practice in order to get a reliable outcome?
So you don't have these huge differences. I mean, within the United States, there are huge differences depending on where you live in how you get treated, and you think we need to standardize treatment to some extent.
Much more, and to know what is really needed. And we know from treating certain diseases, if you look across the country, but also between countries, different approaches create different outcomes at different price. And then we need to know how much do we have to spend to get a certain outcome?
We spend far more on Medicare in Florida than we do in Wisconsin. Without
with poorer,
right,
with
poorer outcome. Oh, it's actually poorer outcome.
Poorer. So it's inversely proportional. It's counterintuitive, but in fact it's true. When you work on quality, when you get it right the first time, when you don't have complications like infections, you get a better outcome for less money.
People tend to equate more with better, and so the incentives are always to have more tests, or is there a way to change that, to get people to think, to get patients to think about, not necessarily more is better, but that, what I'm really just looking for is what will actually be the most effective, in a sense?
Yeah, but without having access to outcome data, also as a patient, as a consumer, how do you judge?
Right.
And so we are navigating in the dark.
Okay.
Secondly, that tendency marries extremely well with the tendency of the physician to apply more tests because A, he may make more money,
right,
and B, he may cover his back, right, if there was afterwards a claim. So the whole system is geared towards more. And we have places in this country, be it Mayo, be it Cleveland Clinic, or be it MD Anderson or other, which are extremely good scientifically. They are also quite transparent. They know how to manage and what gives a good outcome.
Huh. And the question is, how can we extend that model to the rest of the country in some ways?
Yes, and we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have one model.
Right.
So first of all, we have to agree on standards, and then not on multiple islands, but this needs to be a system which speaks to each other. We have also, at the same time as we measure outcome and we look at medical practice and the best practice, to change the incentive system for what do we pay physicians. And the other question is, how do we make also patients co-accountable for their outcome? And here, of course, the big theme is the whole question about prevention, smoking and obesity. And do we have a right to incentivizing people who are normal weight, or to disincentivize people who are overweight?
Can pharmaceuticals, how useful are they in helping hold down costs?
I mean, that's not the key question. I think the key question is, how useful are pharmaceuticals in reducing the burden of disease for people, for patients? Can we help to save lives? Can we reduce morbidity? And can we restore the health, or help to restore the health? And if you take a step back and you look between 1966 roughly and 40 years back, and you see that mortality has been reduced between 40 and 70% for diseases like cardiac disease, ischemic cardiac disease, ulcer, obstructive lung disease, asthma, then you start to see what the impact is. And then you ask yourself, how much is diagnostics, how much is better treatment, how much is drug? And a government analysis came to the conclusion that about 40% of the progress was due to better drug therapy. And so the question is, looking forward, what is the role of drug therapy? I'm very confident that thanks to the ingenuity and the new technologies we have, think of the whole genomics, stem cells, proteomics, what have you, there are so many approaches we can take today that we will be able, I'm very confident, to positively intervene to reduce the morbidity.
When you talk about proteomics and genomics, and sometimes I think to people from the outside it looks as if this is the revolution that's always about to arrive but has never quite gotten here.
The problem is that it's never fast enough. And the fact is it takes 10 to 20 years. It's the same with each and every new technology. People are super excited when the new thing comes out. People, by the way, there's also commercial interest there. Venture capitalists and companies talk about it. And so is a bubble. The bubble bursts because there is nothing coming within the expected period of time, and then eventually, suddenly, it becomes reality. And for everything I've been able to observe, what was logical, scientifically sound, one day became reality.
At Novartis, you've changed focus away from just looking for the kind of legendary billion-dollar compound or something like that. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you decided to do and why?
I became very uncomfortable with what we were producing. So the movement was from chemistry to biology, and from just biology to more genomics and more the modern kind of knowledge. We had also, of course, through rational drug design successes like Glivec,
Right.
And I think these successes encouraged the organization to say, because in Glivec for leukemia, people initially said, we shouldn't embark on this because it's such a small thing.
So the idea was that the market for treating leukemia patients was so small that why bother to go ahead and do it? Okay.
And so to really bring as a culture in the company to say, if we have a good idea, if we have potentially something which really helps people, even if it's a small number, let's do it. And the learning is really, if it's really innovative, we anyway don't know what it will do.
That it might end up creating
much more.
Right.
Or maybe much less.
The traditional pharmaceutical model, well, big pharmaceutical model is, what's the addressable market? Let's go for the biggest addressable market possible. And you were saying, let's go for the most interesting ideas we have, or the most...
It's more, no, we still look at the need. So,
sure.
But it's more maybe, what is serious need?
Okay.
Versus, what can we sell a lot?
Right.
And then, do we have an idea how we could tackle that?
Okay.
If we have, let's go for it.
The vaccine business was a business that traditionally, over time, companies grew less interested in because it's the classic, you take it once and then you don't have to do it again.
That's not the reason.
Oh, so. Okay, so what is the reason?
It was a liability. It was the...
Oh, because it was too
it was
legally dangerous.
Hugely expensive, and there were lawsuits, and one after the other exited the industry, till government made a tort reform for vaccines, and then it stabilized. And more recently, people are again more interested because, of course, the most cost-effective is if you can prevent disease rather than treat disease.
Right.
It is, however, a challenging business, especially the flu, which is so cyclical.
Right.
And we still, today, we make no money.
Now, the other reason the vaccine business is challenging, obviously, is because of this backlash against vaccines, in some sense. At least in the United States, you have this huge movement against it. And I saw that in Switzerland, 9 out of 10 people in some poll didn't want to take the vaccine and thought the swine flu thing was being overhyped. How do you make sense of what's happening about the general backlash against vaccines?
I think we're in a great position as a society. We have, almost eradicated polio. We have, if you look at the measles, it went pretty much down. Now it's increasing again. Pertussis is the same.
Right.
Down, now up again. But if smallpox is almost gone, that's a result of vaccination programs.
Right.
And so people take for granted, which is not yet granted. It comes back if we don't take good care of it. The interesting thing, if you talk about Switzerland, you're absolutely right. That was the survey. Now that H1N1 came, everybody wanted it.
Oh, is that true? Once the disease actually...
Now people were lined up to get more, and it was a big political issue that there was too little supply too late. And here in the U.S., we could have sold much more if we could have produced more.
Right.
And in fact, demand has by far outstripped the supply.
And there are a lot of people who've been now floating the idea of, can we come up with other kinds of systems other than the patent system? Do you think that's something that would ever, what's your opinion on that?
It's clear cut. If intellectual property is undermined, you kill innovation.
Okay.
Full stop. I haven't heard any other system which works. Chinese have kept their porcelain manufacturing till the 18th century secret. Secrecy is no alternative. in science. We want to exchange information as quickly as possible with the outside, so others can also work with this information. And patent law allows us to do that, while if you abolish it, we would be regressing massively.
Pharmaceutical industry has been a big driver of exports and also of high value-added jobs in the developed countries. But you're opening a $1 billion facility in China. Do you see, in the same way that in technology you've seen sort of not the locus, but you've seen sort of influence and power shift to Asia, the same sort of thing going to happen in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yes.
And
yes.
Is that that's the reason, I presume, why you opened the facility?
Sure, and it has to do with the talent, with the absolute determination of the Chinese government to train many scientists, be it engineers or scientists, in our field, and with, unfortunately, the education system in the US, Western Europe the same way, by the way, but which is not any more of the top quality it should be. Luckily, this country still has top academic centers,
right.
Be it in the northeast, be it in the west coast, in other parts of the country. It lives from these, but these institutions cannot live without, NIH money, without investment into education. We need, if I say we, I identify myself with North America, but we need to make sure that we build the best education system, that we incentivize people to go to science, and to make these jobs attractive, available, exciting, well regarded in society. And that will be the strength of this country. This country has had so much innovation, scientific strength, but boy, there is competition out there, and it's for grabbing. So I would be keenly aware that there is a shift towards the east.
Okay. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, James.